All right, well, I'm going to assume that people may still be joining us, but that most people are here. Welcome, everybody. And especially welcome to those people who are coming to a WIA event for the first time. My name is Maia. I'm a principal at Human Studio in Vancouver and also a WIA volunteer. I'd like to acknowledge that we are all located in different cities across Canada. And therefore on different unceded territories, but in particular, those of us in Vancouver are on the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, and we thank them for sharing their lands with us. If you are not from the Lower Mainland, we would love it if you let us know in the chat where you're from. We just like to, since we started doing these events online, we're interested to see how many people are still taking advantage from outside of Vancouver, as I think our events are much wider reaching now. If you would like to join us, give us your email so you can be part of the newsletter group. We'd love to let you know what's going on. We have events once a month or every 2 months, the more people come, the better. They're not all free like this one, but they're all for just a nominal charge, and it helps to support our organization. This particular presentation is worth 2 LUs, AIBC credits. So please put your name and your AIBC number in the chat, and Ariana will be harvesting those and submitting them to the AIBC. So that has to be done during this presentation. Also, if you have questions for any of the presenters, please also note them in the chat. It can be anonymous if you want to put your name, or you can ask to be anonymous if you would like. And also note who the question is for, unless it's just sort of a general question for anyone or everyone.
And you can send them to myself if you wish to be made more anonymous in the thread as well. Brianna, thanks.
Excellent. Okay. So we have 4 wonderful speakers tonight. We have Robyn Fenton, Maia Tarassoff, Ouri Scott, and Kate Gerson. So first off, partner at Tectonic Architecture, and according to LinkedIn, a professional nerd, we have Robyn Fenton. Go ahead, Robyn.
Thanks, everyone. Just let me get my screens organized here. Okay. So hopefully that's working. Move that away. Okay, excellent. So hi, everybody. We were asked to put together, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here of what we were doing. So a brief history of past work experience and how that's led to where I am now. So for me, my architecture career started when I grew up here in Vancouver and I went to Sydney, Australia for school. I have Australian heritage, so I moved there and studied at the University of Technology, Sydney, which, as you can see on the right there, it had a very uninspiring campus with some very brutalist 70s architecture. But it was a great experience. So I was there for 7 years and did my education there. And while I was there, well, let me see if I can scroll down, I worked for an architect. And so it was a cooperative program. So during my 6 years of schooling, 5 of those years, I actually worked for Yvonne Haber Architect, and it was a great experience. She was the principal, I was her assistant. And so, yeah, I got tons of experience, predominantly in residential, mostly renovations, but we did some really interesting work. And so scrolling, here we go. And it was a great experience. I got to see all different sides of the practice. So then when I moved back to Vancouver after my degrees in 2007, for those of you who are around and remember, 2007 was a very exciting time in Vancouver. It was the build up to the Olympics. There was tons of construction going on. 2008 hadn't happened yet. So it was a really great time to be in Vancouver. So I found a job at a great firm called Bonnie Madison Architects. And that was the start of my internship. Formally, and had some great experience there, good practical experience with, BC housing projects and some great, commercial buildings and some very practical things for BC housing, and then some fun projects where, we were doing, redesigns for some commercial clients. So it was a great experience. Oh, I'm watching the clock here, which I forgot to start. It was a great experience with some, great principals, really nice other people in the office, and a really good learning experience. And I stayed there for about 5.5 years, completed my internship, which took me about 4 years, including the NCARB exams. And then by that time, when I've been registered for a couple of years, I sort of decided that I think I wanted to try something different. And in the meantime, I sort of called this slide Bridge. I'd been doing work for sort of moonlighting on the side, doing a bit of extra drafting, as a lot of us do, earning a bit of money. And I was drafting for some other architects. So when I decided that my time was up at Bonnie Madison, I felt like I wanted to move on and maybe go out on my own. I didn't have any projects on my own other than doing a small project for my mother. And so I was able to sort of bridge that gap of leaving full-time employment and jumping out on my own by doing some work for other architects and drafting. And that enabled me to keep an income coming in while I was building up my practice and finding work on my own. So Reforma Architecture was started in 2013. I went through a couple of iterations of various logos and color schemes, and did some work. So this happens to be the apartment I did for my mother. We did a nice renovation of her place. I moved on and was able to do some daycare projects, got some commercial clients, so generally small scale commercial work and residential work. Lately, some building envelope work, and then lately have been doing some more residential work, and then also some vet clinics. Oh, I didn't show the pictures of, vet clinics are later. Sorry, this is Reforma. Sorry, I'm refocusing here. Reforma, I'm jumping ahead in my presentation. So that was the basis of going out on my own. So I did that for about 7 years on my own. And in the meantime, I snuck it in here. Outside of the office, I was doing lots of different things as well. So I took some work at BCIT as a teaching assistant, a TA, teaching Vectorworks. The professional nerd comes from the Vancouver Design Nerds. I was a board member there and a facilitator and for several years, and got some great experience doing community engagement and facilitating events. And it really piqued my interest in doing those kinds of things, which is now carrying forward into some of the work I'm doing. So that was an awesome experience and introduced to a whole different side of Vancouver and a bunch of different people. I was a volunteer member on the Vancouver Biodiesel Co-op. I volunteered for Girl Guides of Canada. So I did all these other things that were, not really, some of them not related to architecture at all, some of them sort of architecture adjacent. And it was great meeting lots of different people, getting a variety of experience. Lately, I've been involved with Birch, which is I live on Bowen Island. So we have a community housing organization that we're trying to get some affordable housing built. So I've been involved with them on the sort of ownership side of trying to get some, housing built, which has been really great experience. And then I also volunteer for the Bowen Island municipality. I chair the Housing Advisory Committee, which is also another interesting side of it, trying to advise and develop policy and those kinds of things. Another side of my work that I do that I was introduced to, in fact, back in 2013, I took a training course at one of the AIBC conferences on post-disaster building assessments. And soon after that, the AIBC formed a committee. I joined it, and for the 6 years, I think that the committee existed, I was on it, and I chaired it for a little bit as well. And that was a really interesting experience. And in fact, I'm still involved in that. So I work for the AIBC as the post-disaster liaison. So continuing the work, we did some work with, as you can see, we worked on this, oh God, it's such a mouthful, the BC Post-Disaster Building Assessment Framework and Recommendations, which was a 2-year federally funded project with the institutes you can see at the bottom there. If you have questions about it, hopefully we'll have some time, but if not, you can contact me later about this one. I won't take up too much time, but again, that was another thing sort of architecture adjacent that was really interesting. And it led to what is now my current position at Tectonic Architecture. And why that is on that committee, I met Marguerite LeCant-Francis, and she is now my business partner. And so we were chatting a couple of years ago, and I was, around 40 at the time, had been working for almost 20 years in the industry, was on my own as a sole practitioner, and had kind of, I don't know, reached a point where I needed a change. I felt like I'd been doing kind of the same thing for about 20 years, and I wanted to shift and go more into, more management, being more of a principal, kind of getting some employees under me, that kind of shift for, the next stage of my career, but was a little worried about doing it on my own. And I, Marguerite and I had known each other for a long time, and we started talking, and she was looking for the same thing. So there you go. And it was 2020, the pandemic year. So that actually fast forwarded our plans because work slowed down for both of us. So we fast forwarded on the partnership and started doing work together. So I brought a few projects in that I'd started from my previous firm, and we finished off as Tectonic. So this is a fourplex on Bowen Island. And then lately, we've been doing some vet clinics, which has been a lot of fun. And so we've had a couple of those open up recently. So we've got a variety of clients. We're doing, like say, commercial work and residential work, still some government work. So it's a real variety, and we're having a lot of fun and growing our business. And I'm really enjoying being a principal, and it's been a big learning curve, and it will continue to be a big learning curve, but I'm really enjoying the challenge and the shift. And then we were asked to kind of talk about what's next. And like, that's really it for me, is like this big, huge learning curve of kind of going from being like a practicing sole practitioner, kind of doing everything and having a little bit of help, to shifting and being more of a principal and overseeing staff and helping them along and mentoring them and doing all of the stuff that you do as a partner. So it's been fun so far the last couple of years, and I'm actually really looking forward to this next phase of my career as I keep learning and we keep building our business. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure I went over time, and pass it over to the next person.
Thank you, Robyn. Robyn has to leave early, so we won't get a chance to ask her many questions, but I'm just going to ask you a question right off the bat, Robyn, since you have to leave. A lot of people think about starting their own business, going out on their own, becoming, their own boss and all that. How do you know when you're ready?
Ooh, that's a great question. Really interesting. I felt like I was ready. I felt like I'd sort of had my time, and the firm that I'm working at was great. But sometimes you just sort of reach that point where I think I've learned as much as I can, and I just had that feeling that I was ready to move on. And I was faced with the decision: okay, well, I'm registered. Do I want to go on my own, or do I want to go look for a job somewhere else? And I've always been kind of a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. My mother's also an entrepreneur, so I've kind of always known that I wanted to branch it on my own at some stage. And so at that point, I think I was 33, and I was like, well, I might as well try to go out on my own. And I knew I had that income that was coming in, because I think that's the scariest part, is the money side of things and getting the work, right? So I knew I could cover myself with the income I was getting on my sort of drafting work. And I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And if it doesn't work, I can always go get a job and I won't be in any worse position. So I think it's probably different for everybody. And I just kind of trusted my instincts that I felt ready to go. And I'd done a couple of small projects, just sort of on the side on my own, and felt confident doing that. And so I'm not sure. I think the finances is probably one of the trickier things for people. If you've had the confidence to know you feel like you're gonna go on your own now or eventually. So I think a lot of people don't want to do that. They're very happy to work in a firm. But if you kind of have that feeling that you might, I feel like that's probably one of the biggest things, is how to get those first jobs, how to keep the finances going. And
courage and money are the two big factors. Yes,
I would agree. Courage and money.
Okay, thank you so much, Robyn. All right, to our next speaker, principal, founder of Petit Architecture and champion of the next generation. Please welcome Maia Tarassoff.
9 years ago, I moved to Vancouver, and I attended the similar events for Career Paths, and it was really good for me to see what other architects do, and kind of eye-opening, that liberating, that there was other options. So it's kind of interesting that I'm on the other side now, presenting. But does everybody see my screen? It's working? Okay, perfect. So so my name is Maia Tarassoff. I'm a mother of 2 children, and a trained architect from France. So that means I'm not registered in AIBC. I am an architect in France. I grew up in Paris in a very artistic family. And my dad was a philosophy major, a teacher, and an entrepreneur, and art gallery owner, an art collector. And my mom was a clothes designer, but she stayed at home when we arrived. as I didn't really fit in the regular school system in France, my parents put me in an alternative elementary school. And I met a wonderful teacher there. Her name is Elise, and she's no longer with us, unfortunately, but she was now that I, think about my career path, I realize, it kind of all makes sense from when I met her, basically, because now I'm teaching, and I think of her a lot. So anyway, she was an amazing art teacher in our school. And that's her in our first trip to the USA with the school, and doing a little bit of a Andy Warhol photo there. So after elementary school, I went to a high school, an art high school. So in France, you can kind of pick your, you have to choose your path quite early. It's a little bit interesting that way. So I went to an applied arts high school and loved it. We were introduced to graphic design, fashion design, product design, interior design, all things design. The teachers there were amazing. They were young, they were dynamic, involved. Like, we were always doing very contemporary things with things that were happening. Like in Paris, you'd have an exhibition and they would do something around that, and they had very high standard for us. So that was where I find that I learned a lot, I guess. This is a photo of the first day in school. You had to, the new people coming, you had to design and draw something, paint on the floor in school. It was, yeah, very fun place to be. So I picked interior design as a bachelor and then I wanted, after that, I wanted to go to scenography, but that didn't work out at the school I wanted to. So I followed my friends and went to architecture instead. I thought, well, if I'm an architect, I can do many other things. Like, that would be, the top, and then I can just do scenography on the side. At the time, that's what I was thinking. But I didn't love architecture school, to be honest, in France. I decided to do a year abroad in Rome with the Erasmus program. So that was quite an amazing year, obviously. Then I returned to Paris and I graduated with a thesis on cultural and social spaces. So I became an architect in 2006. And then, I started working in several firms in Paris. So my first job there was a bit of a surprise. I didn't know that I was hired as a project manager, to be honest. I did the interview and it wasn't clear. Like, I don't know. It was the first big job and I didn't ask the right questions, and I just throw myself in there, which was fun, I guess, risky. I came and I was like, oh, I'm the only person. I'm supposed to. So they had just won this competition. And it was a big 28 social housing dwelling in the center of Paris. And they had won the competition, and it was like, okay, here, now you take this to completion. Yeah, so it was to reach a energy efficiency of 50 kilowatt hour per meter square per year. So, that was a big challenge, and I took it on, and it's a social housing. So it's a kind of a BC housing project. So I dealt with those kinds of people, and it was just very new, and a lot of admin work and a lot of paperwork, obviously. But it was challenging and lots of sweats, lots of tears. Took 4 years of my life, but hey, we did it. It's completed. So that was my introduction to sustainability and energy efficiency buildings. So I stayed about 4 years at this firm, and we also did a lot of family housing in and around Paris. Our design were inspired by Japanese architecture a lot, and we did lots of models. This is way back when we didn't have a lot of yeah, no laser cutter, nothing fancy, just lots of free student work. So, so we also took part in many other social housing competitions in Paris. Like in France, architecture is there's a lot of competitions, like that's how it works. And the social housing projects over there through the competitions can be very inventive, and cities promotes young architects and creativity. And that's something I've missed and haven't seen as much, I guess, in Vancouver. It's a little bit different how it works here, I find. So yeah, my partner and I, we had our first child in 2012, and we decided to move to Vancouver in our new adventure. We had a working holiday visa of 1 year and just a lot of bags, just moved. So in Vancouver, I started working quite rapidly in interior design. I just wanted a faster pace. I wanted to do something more creative, I guess, after my 5 years of, you know, designing that social housing project. I did mostly office and commercial spaces. And I think the most difficult thing for me when I arrived was to adjust to imperial measurements, which I still hate. Light wood construction, and the work culture in Vancouver, just like it was kind of very different. Yeah, so I worked at Evoke, Square One Interiors, and yeah, and Michael Green for a very short time. So on mat leave with my second baby, I took the Passive House certification course and I got certified. At the time, not many people around me cared about energy efficiency too much. So I'm happy that that's changed and it's getting more momentum. So when I returned to work, I faced a little bit new struggles, you know, being a mother of 2 and a full-time designer, like the reality kind of checked in, you know, kind of think about what I really wanted to do with my life and career. And I decided I wanted to work part-time with like-minded people, mostly mothers, to be honest. That's what I was, what I felt. But I couldn't find any firms that hire part-time, right? Like that's a big struggle, I find. So I was like, well, I'm gonna do some contract work for other interior design firms. I met this group of women that had like different practices, so I was able to do some contract work for them. And there I really found like support and finally like a community that understood me and I guess grew with me, and I could grow with them and like support and not competition, like in terms of work atmosphere, I guess. Yeah, so and then on the side, I started Petit Architect in 2017. I was always passionate about education, but I never thought I was going to be a teacher. But I don't know, just having kids, like loving crafts, and I thought I'd give it a go. I thought about my teacher previously, like my art teacher, and I was like, well, I think that I should try something like this. So anyway, it started, and yeah, so at Petit Architect, our mission is to educate, engage, and inspire the young generations to design and build more sustainable, beautiful, and welcoming cities. So I teach design thinking with real world problems, and I teach them to build with their hands in a world of technology and screens, because I still think there's a lot of value. So yeah, so our goal is to raise awareness about the energy consumption in buildings. You know, Canada's built environment is not performing very, very well. So I teach in high schools. I have after school classes online and in person. This is a passive house workshops that we did in 2019 before the pandemic. We did about 3 of those with Passive House Canada. This is IDS in 2019. I was approached to do a youth programming there. So I also did some eco neighborhoods, passive house workshops there. Yeah, so this is what I've been doing for the past 5 years. It slowly grew to being a full-time thing. At first I had like a side, like same as you, Robyn, like sort of drafting jobs on the side. And now this is my full-time job, and which is not full-time, by the way, because like I said, I wanted to work part-time, but it's my full-time, I guess, income. And this is the team of teachers that have joined me in my little adventure. They're all either designers or architects and have a passion for architecture. So what I wanted to say is that I started Petit Architects to have a better balanced life, and because I could not find that in the architecture world, to be honest, and I did not want to have my own practice. I just felt like that was just too overwhelming for me. Yeah, today I'm very grateful and proud that I created my own path, and I really encourage any women or mothers to do some changes if they feel like some things are not working for them. It's a tough industry to be a mom. I mean, I think that it's getting better, but you know, still it's tough. And I want to say that my path has been nothing linear. And I think the most liberating thing for me was when I realized that I'm not the only one kind of trying to figure things out. In fact, most people and firms I worked with and at were struggling in their own ways and, you know, sort of making it work as they go. So my advice, I guess, would be to stop thinking that everyone else has it all figured out. And, you know, you were asking like, when is it a good time? And to, like, I think once I realized that everybody else was kind of winging it, not in a bad way, just like it's life. Everybody's no one's perfect. Like nobody has it all figured out, right? So then I felt like, oh, I'm empowered to do whatever I want and dream of. So yeah, thank you. So I don't know hope I didn't go through too long.
Thank you, Maia. That was wonderful. Next up, we have originally from the Northwest Territories and principal at Urban Arts Architecture. Please welcome Ouri Scott.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here today to talk about my journey in architecture. Similar to the other speakers, I'll share with you a little bit about my school and work experience and what led me to be a partner and principal at Urban Arts Architecture. Can you see my slides advancing? Yeah, okay, great. I'll tell you a little bit first before getting into all the details about myself. I'm Cleacho Denny from the Northwest Territories originally. You can see on the map my traditional territory, and I'd like to take a moment to say Sinana Kinawunda, which means it's kind of warms my heart to be amongst you today. My grandparents are Joe, Susie, and Julie Mackenzie, and Harry and Darlene Scott. And my parents are Patrick and Gabrielle Scott. I come from a large family and grew up living in Yellowknife.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we actually cannot see anything but your first slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now is it on my second slide, Maia?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we'll just leave it in this mode. Let's start over again. Ouri Scott CA, Sina na Kena Unda, Clincho Gatinongo Soate. So again, my name is Ouri Scott. I'm Clincho Deni from the Northwest Territories. My traditional territory is called Mumfuigogade, and it's situated between Great Slave Lake and Great Bear Lake. My grandparents, Joe, Susie, and Julie Mackenzie, and Harry and Darlene Scott. I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, and auntie. I have lots of nieces and nephews. I have 5 sisters, 2 brothers. As an architect, I see myself as a steward of the land, a facilitator of community visions, and an advocate for Indigenous voice and design. As is part of protocol within my own nation, it's important to recognize myself as a guest on the territory that I reside in and where I'm currently located on the Coast Salish territory. So I'd like to thank the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and especially their ancestors for taking care of this beautiful land on that we live on. So my journey in architecture, I'll start off sharing with you a little bit about my schooling. As I mentioned, I grew up in the Northwest Territories, and I went to high school in Yellowknife. From there, I went to the University of Calgary, where I did a Bachelor of Arts in Northern Planning and Development Studies and Architecture Studies. Going from a small town such as Yellowknife to a university in Calgary was a huge transition for me and a huge change. I think the university residents and the university population was like bigger than my town. So it was a big change, but I had a lot of people around me to encourage and support me. And so it helped me to have a successful journey at that stage. I did my master's degree here in Vancouver at UBC, and interspersed within within the schooling from high school through to my graduate school, I've had lots of interesting work experience. And it's not just the architecture experience, I think, that has really enriched my practice, but it's some of the other things that I had an opportunity to do. So before doing my master's degree, I lived in Slovakia for a few years and I taught English. Before that, I lived in Paris for a year and did an internship at UNESCO in a project around traditional knowledge for Indigenous communities. After I finished my thesis at UBC, I did a little design build project up in the Northwest Territories related to my thesis project. And I had an opportunity to work as a summer student in architecture firms in the Northwest Territories, as well as here in Vancouver. I also had a chance to work in the government in community planning divisions and also in housing divisions. So it helped me see architecture from many different sides, and also to see some of the kind of inside workings of some of the clients that we work with, such as government agencies. While I was a student at UBC, I was approached by a firm called Hutzenbacher Boniface Hayden at the time about working with them on a project for the Olympics. And so I took a year off school and I went to work with them. And I think one of the kind of greatest pieces of advice I got was to take the opportunities when they come, and that was from Norm Hudson, and he encouraged me to take time off school to join them with the project, and it was really meaningful because I took some time off. I worked with them. I got fabulous experience, and was able to miss that really bad recession in 2008. I went back to school to finish my degree, and by the time I returned back to architecture, the economy was picking up again. So his advice was based around, you never know what's going to change in the industry, and when there's a good job, it's a good time to maybe change your course from what you originally thought. And so that's been instrumental in my practice. After working with HBBH, I was able to return to the same firm and worked with them. They're now DIALOG, and I worked in the Vancouver studio I was able to move with the practice and stay in the same firm when I moved to Toronto for a few years, and then coming back to Vancouver, rejoined the Vancouver studio with Dialogue. I was reflecting today on how much I learned from my Dialogue colleagues, and a couple of them are on the call today, Maia included, Gerson included, and so I felt like I grew up when I was working there. In between my kind of work experience was interspersed having two children. So my son Clement was born after I worked for a couple of years, and then my son Camille was born when I was working in Toronto. After I left Dialogue, I joined Urban Arts Architecture as an architect, then an associate and a principal. But I think these other kind of moments I feel like were important in helping me understand the world as a whole. And while it didn't make my path linear, I think it made it a lot more rich. And having children also, I felt like enriched my experience of the world and understanding of things like accessibility and space. It made it harder to get registered, and it made it take a lot more time, but I still didn't stop me from reaching that goal of getting registered. So my path to partnership, I really knew I wanted to be able to use my voice as an Indigenous person for my own good, and not to just give it away, and not to just work with others who were able to gain advantage from it. And so for me, that meant that I needed to find an opportunity to be a partner in a firm. I also knew that I really wanted to continue working on larger scale projects, which I was doing at Dialogue. I didn't want to switch to really small scale projects, which I would have had to do going out on my own. And so I looked for a firm where I could work, where there was an opportunity to grow and become a partner. And I set that out from the beginning of my time there. It was clearly stated that was my goal, and then I was able to work towards that. I think finding my voice really helped lead me towards that path of partnership. I had to advocate for myself to get registered because it took me a couple of extra years in that process because I had children. I was at risk of losing hours that I had gained early on in my internship because it was taking the length it takes when you have two kids and you take time off for that. So I had to advocate really strongly to get the hours that I needed to get registered on time. Finding my voice also helped me to advocate in my community and get involved in the community. And again, it was another person at Dialogue who taught me, or who shared with me how important it is, and that was Bruce Hayden. He really encouraged me to reach out in the community and to be very specific about who and how I was reaching out. And so I thought about that hard, and I decided I'd put myself out there. I'd spend a year kind of raising my voice when there was an opportunity and when I thought it was appropriate, and it led to huge amounts of change in my practice and in my path. It led to more opportunities to advocate and to be involved in really interesting projects. And now in partnership, this process of finding my voice is also important, as I learned how to not just practice with intention, but also how to lead a practice with intention, and how to do that that's guided by my values. And you know, it's an ongoing learning curve, learning how to lead a practice and then how to do it in the right way, in a way that's meaningful for you. So that's something that I'm working on. In terms of the projects that I do now, so like I said, I like to work kind of in the community scale and with Indigenous communities. So this is a project I did recently, or we finished recently, for the Shwahamo community outside of Hope. It's a community center, and it was focused on really understanding a connection to place, a connection to the land, and a respect for for ancestors. I'm also working in the academic field. So we have a project, the First Peoples Gathering House at SFU, that's out for tender right now, and it should start construction this winter. And it's a First Peoples, it's a longhouse for Indigenous students, faculty, and staff to come together and to celebrate and revitalize Indigenous culture. And then housing is a large part of our practice, working with Indigenous clients in a lot in the Lower Mainland, so working with Musqueam, with Squamish, and this project is for the Aboriginal Land Trust on Hastings. It's a housing and healing center, and it'll be a project. The idea is that a longhouse wrapped in a blanket, and the wrapping of a blanket really demonstrates caring and respect and honoring. So that's the idea around this building, is to wrap the community members who might be living here or coming here for health and healing services, to wrap them and honor them in this blanketing fashion. So what's next to my practice? I think this idea of decolonizing practice is something I think about a lot. There's so many conversations right now around reconciliation, particularly after they found all of the children, the unmarked graves last year. And I think it's finally this milestone that we needed to wake people up to the importance of reconciliation. So what does that mean for us as architects? What does it mean for how we practice architecture and how we lead an architecture firm? And I think it comes to things like thinking about equity, climate change, and work-life balance. In terms of all of those things coming together, I'm struck by the words of artist Greg Deal, who said, today I was asked what is most important to Indigenous people, the land, protecting traditions, your language, or your people. And I told him all of those are the same thing. And so in our understanding of the importance of Indigenous cultures is really understanding how holistic it is to think about all of these different aspects as we decolonize architecture and decolonize our cities, that it's not just about one thing. The land is important to protecting tradition. It's important to cultural revitalization, and all of these things can come together for better change. Also looking at local knowledge systems and how these can provide a holistic worldview to the community and our environment. We know that our Indigenous people have deep-seated knowledge of place, and how do we respect that and honor it, and also find ways to learn from it so that we can adapt to and adjust to our changing community and in our environment in a resilient way. And then about that piece around cultural revitalization, my great uncle, Chief Jimmy Bruno, said that we need to be strong like two people, and that's about understanding your Indigenous heritage, but also being a strong, educated person in the Western world. And so when I feel like I am not being Indigenous enough, then I remind myself that it's okay, and I move forward as a strong person in two worlds, or a single person who's strong as two people. Masicho.
Thank you, Ouri. And Kate, I believe you are back online. Kate is an associate
I'm
at
hoping
DIALOG.
so. That might,
Associate at DIALOG, and to many of us, legendary mentor for many, many years. Please welcome Kate.
thank you. Okay. And I'm looking at another screen, so sorry that I'm not looking at people in the process. Anyway, long career, too many slides, as it says there. And in my case, architecture is a genetic disease. Come on, here we go. So starting with my grandfather and his two brothers in Hamburg, Germany. They were architects there. And sorry, I'm stuck with the pace that this is doing for me. So they did a lot of residential and office, pretty significant buildings in Hamburg. Then my father, Wolfgang Gerson, was born in Hamburg and grew up in this house, of course, designed by his father and his two uncles. And here he is many decades later in West Vancouver, and the house that I grew up in there. And so this is me now growing up in this house in West Vancouver that my father had designed. Another building that had a big influence for me as I was growing up was the Unitarian Church in Vancouver, which was also designed by my father. So going to university, I started out doing a degree in art history. And then when graduating from art history, tried to figure out, okay, what do I do with this degree? I enjoyed craft. I enjoyed fine arts, but never felt like I could be an artist. I liked the combination of that and problem solving, etc. So in the end, decided architecture was a good fit for me. Went to Halifax to school there to study architecture. A variety, of course, of projects there. And looking back on it, I realized that there were definitely some emerging themes that came out of my experience at the school there that ended up really having a big influence on my my career in the end. So definitely a West Coast influence, influenced by the context of my projects. Topography, I grew up actually in a house on quite a steep hill and was set into the hill in an interesting way. And I think that's enabled me to understand how to design around serious topography. I've done a lot of institutional projects and community buildings, arts facilities, and again, a lot of my school projects had those kinds of focuses. Waiting for this to advance. Heritage, yeah, there were a number of heritage-related projects that I did at school and have been doing since then, definitely, and adaptive reuse with heritage buildings. And infill, my thesis project at school was an infill project in a sort of heritage neighborhood in Halifax. Right after graduating, I went to Montreal, worked there for a couple of years, primarily at ARCOP, and that Alcan project was sort of the main project I worked on there. Then back to Vancouver, spent a couple of years at various different firms, including Ericsson's, including Billington Poon, again, a lot of institutional projects, heritage-focused projects, arts-related facilities. Ended up working for Henry Hawthorne, who did quite a bit in the way of arts facilities and museums, etc. And particularly working on the Shadbolt Center in Burnaby. And that was a joint venture project together with Hotzenbacher Architects. And that's what landed me at Hotzenbacher eventually, working on that project, which then became Hotzenbacher Boniface Hayden and eventually became DIALOG. Having worked on Shadbolt Center, of course, led me to quite a few other arts-related projects over the years. Another significant project I worked on while at Hotzenbacher was the Richmond City Hall, which of course led to other municipal projects. My focus, particularly my role on the Richmond City Hall, was an interiors focus, and that was the case with several of the fairly significant projects that I've worked on over the years here. Various other municipal hall upgrades. I've also worked on a number of projects out of UBC, and one of the most interesting ones definitely was the new student union building, now known as the Nest. Again, my role on that project was an interiors focus. So here are some interior shots of that. I worked on a number of renovation and addition projects over the years. One significant one that I spent about 5 years of my life on and a lot of gray hairs was the CBC project, which Ouri actually worked on, helped on the CA part of it with me, which was wonderful to work with her on it. So it involved quite a bit of demolition, a lot of renovation to the existing building, and then a major addition as well. That project I got to work on both interior and exterior. Of course, there were more heritage and adaptive reuse and infill projects. The CBC, of course, incorporated all of that. This shipyards project in North Van is a more recent one that I worked on in that regard, including reconstruction of this big machine shop shed on the site, and then adding a very simple contemporary infill piece to it as well. Again, partly institutional as well as heritage and adaptive reuse, which leads to my graduation project, I'm calling it, what I'm working on right now, which is a new office building for the First Nations Health Authority. And I want to point out with this one that every project, even when you've been practicing for a long time, leads to new experiences. So on that project, it's a first in doing a First Nations project. It's a first in doing mass timber. This is getting ahead of me now. Words of wisdom from my experiences over the years, definitely patience. It takes a lifetime to build your career, so give it that time. My computer just messed up on me again. Now I can't see what I'm looking at and talking about, so I'm going to talk from the.
It says words of wisdom.
Yeah, I'll have to talk from the top of my head, and my apologies for the noise behind me. I did want to talk about, yes, patience, everything that comes along, you should be able to benefit from the opportunities. There's always something to learn with every project. Obviously, you do want to be progressing in your career. I'm going from memory because I can't see the screen anymore. That at some point you may need to change jobs, or hopefully you can find ways to progress within where you work. And then I was also going to talk a little bit about, in my career, at some point, I realized that actually I'm not really interested in becoming a partner of a firm. I enjoy the work I do as an employee, and that I feel like I can be much more deeply involved in my projects as a result of being able to really focus on the projects, having somebody else worrying about the running of the firms, the getting of the projects, the developing of clients, etc. So I find that, definitely everybody has their own ambitions, their own course, but for me, this has been the perfect fit to be working as an employee in a firm where I'm comfortable and can really enjoy the projects and getting deeply into the details and the problem solving, which is what I really like about architecture. And I'm guessing that my PowerPoint has run out by now, but I can't tell. So I'm going to leave it there. But
Okay,
my
thank
problem
you,
is
Kate.
I don't think I can't access it to stop screen sharing.
No, I think
And my
words of wisdom is a great place to end.
Yeah, I think that's a nice segue actually to some of the questions. So if everyone's ready, maybe we could start looking through a few of those.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So I have one here for Maia. In addition to sustainability, what is the inspiration for your teaching curriculum, or how do you come up with the art/craft activities for Petit Architect? And do you have a favorite project to date?
Oh, thank you. Let me start the video again. Kate, you still, we can still hear you, or the noise. So how I come up with crafts and projects. So it depends on how long I have and where I teach. I try to focus on sustainability, but I also teach sometimes like 1 hour projects. So it has to be like super fast. There's no storage. The kids have to make something in an hour. So that can be very challenging. So I can't really use a lot of glue anyway. So the inspiration comes from looking at things and just being very creative with recycled and little bits and pieces. And sometimes I see something at a store, like at the dollar store, and I'm like, oh, I can do something with this. And then I try to find something that I know of architecture that's related to that shape or whatever. And then sometimes it's the other way around. Like I really like Shigeru Ban or Kengo Kuma or, Mies van der Rohe. So I'm like, oh, okay, what project? Like I sometimes I get inspired by the architect or one of their buildings, and then we do the small model or drawing exercise that goes with that architect. So yeah, I'm always kind of creating on the back end, I guess. And my favorite project, oh my God, I don't know. The most rewarding for me is probably to teach about eco neighborhoods and kind of low energy buildings like Passive House, because I feel like I have a purpose and I'm very passionate about climate change. So I think that's probably the one I like the most doing, which is one of the most popular ones in school. So it's great.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, your passion's very much coming through. So that's so wonderful. We do have a question for Ouri next. So let's see. You mentioned the importance of using your voice for you and not just giving it away. And so obviously that speaks to the importance of intentionality, and you discussed, the importance of also your community involvement. And so a few people have raised this to me. So there's lots of curiosity in knowing whether or not there were instances in which you spoke up and were shut down. And how did you deal with that? Or alternatively, if someone wanted to work with you and it didn't align with your values. So yeah, if you can discuss maybe how you navigated those situations, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, that's a tough question. Certainly there have been many opportunities or instances where I felt othered by bringing up Indigenous concepts or voices. And I can think of times where, for example, I've been a guest speaker at the architecture school with other panelists, and many times it's those you would expect who are used to using their voice in a way that shuts everyone else down, that I was shut down, and it just felt so traumatizing, that I'm really careful about the venues that I participate in, because I don't enjoy that experience of the trauma of feeling called out for how I use my voice and for sharing Indigenous values. But those experiences are kind of few and far between, and mostly people come to me because they're interested in hearing and learning and having an opportunity to share. So usually they're very positive and uplifting, and I enjoy being part of the community. And so being able to have an opportunity to give back is really meaningful. I hope that answers it.
I think just in sharing how careful you are about which venue and arena you choose to use your voice is a good lesson for all of us, certainly. So, okay, well, let's see. We've got a question for Kate that just came through. Having so many years of experience before COVID and then going through it like everyone else, you know, do you think that working from home is an effective way for teams to work, considering that you say architecture is a team sport?
Architecture absolutely is a team sport, and I think to some extent it depends a little bit on the phase of a project. So the FNHA project that I was working on, luckily we were at the CD stage already when the world shut down. I think if we were in early design stage, it would have been a lot more difficult. But I also feel as though, quite aside from just the direct project work, which I think, you know, we could handle reasonably well virtually, that the learning opportunities for people is much reduced. Just sort of being able to overhear conversations going on around you when you're in the office, and learning from those things, seeing more about what other people are working on that you wouldn't be exposed to if everything is being done virtually. So I think that there is a lot that gets missed when working virtually, even if, sort of, as I said, the direct work itself maybe can be done quite well. I think the opportunities for growth and for sharing of ideas and so on is definitely sort of strangled.
I'm curious to hear actually some of the other panelists' opinion on that as well, if it's you know, in alignment, or does it differ at all?
I would say one of my best learning experiences was sitting beside Kate and from her as she did her work. And, you know, it was before email was the main thing, I would say, and hearing her speak on the phone and talk to contractors and client, and, you know, just like work through all the CA. I learned so much from it. It was such a valuable experience. So not having particularly young staff in the studio is really a lost opportunity for, I think, for our youngest generation entering practice today. And I look forward to when we are all, you know, safely together all the time, because for me that was invaluable.
And Maia, I know, I was going to say, I know you're not necessarily working in the same type of office environment, but obviously you would have faced these challenges in teaching your lessons. So how was that shift for you?
Yeah, well, everything stopped for me, so it was a bit of a shock, and I just came home with 2 kids and had to teach them, which is a whole other story. So yeah, I kind of had to stop for a while, and it was scary, and but, you know, and I did pivot to some online classes and things like that. I personally, I really value the presential opportunities to meet people. I mean, it's hard to teach online with kids. It's almost impossible, especially something so creative and hands-on. Yeah, and I do miss, like, I have to say, like, being, you know, doing the work I do now is way more lonely in the way that I'm by myself a lot. Now, I mean, I have a team, but I don't really see them very often. I recently hired somebody that's a bit more involved, so I see her, but I do miss, like, you know, the office chats. And but then when I went to more contract work for, again, more like-minded sort of women women-owned little businesses, that's when I found the community, and I do miss that community and of sharing. And I don't think that architecture like can be as, I mean, I do value, like Kate, the teamwork and I think it's really a problem to have everybody on their screen and just meet and just be creative by yourself. I just love bouncing ideas with people, and I would not be, I don't remember the best part I liked about being an architect and a designer when I did some design work was all the groups and the meetings and the people working with me. So I think that's another thing I realize. Whatever the project may be, I feel like the team is the most important for me, I guess. Like if there's an amazing project but the team is horrible and the people you're working with are horrible, like I'd rather do a boring project with great people, I guess. So yeah, but I'm very social. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that like a lot of people that I've even been in conversation with recently have also brought up just the importance of like the people that you're working with and the culture of that environment. So that links to a couple of questions that came through. One of them was, I guess, for all panelists, but people are curious to know the I guess pros and cons of working in a much larger firm versus your experiences on a smaller team. So I'd be interested in hearing that from all of you.
I'd be happy. Okay, sorry.
I was going to say, having gone from a big firm like Dialogue to a smaller firm like Urban Arts, one of the big differences is the resources that you have available to you. And when I started at Urban Arts, we were 8 people, and so we didn't have, the IT support and that those kinds of extra resources that you might have in a larger firm. And I knew that's what I was getting into. So when I had to set up my email on the first day by myself, I was like, okay, I can do this. It's going to be okay. But I think that's one of the big differences.
I was going to say, when I started at Hotzenbacher, we were a pretty small firm. We were probably about 15 people, something like that. So, the process has been very gradual for me, the sort of evolution of the firm over the 30 plus years that I've been here. I don't know that I would have ever chosen to be in such a large firm to start with, but I found the process and the transition interesting. And yeah, as Ouri said, there definitely are some benefits of the support networks that are there in larger firms, and some of the opportunities in terms of the sorts of projects also. So definitely some pros and cons, I'd say, to it. And when you're in a larger firm, you tend to be kind of within a smaller group to some extent within that firm. So some of the benefits of being in a small firm you can carve out for yourself, I think, in a bigger firm as well.
I can speak a little bit, but I don't have an experience with large firms in Canada. My experience with large firms is in Paris, and it was kind of a factory way of making buildings. One person was doing only stairs, one person was designing only bathrooms, and the other person was doing like only the facade. So I thought it was like, I could not believe this guy my project manager had been working on that same facade for like, honestly, 2 years or something crazy. I was just like, how can, like, it was so compartmented. Is that a word? I don't know. So to me, yeah, that did not appeal to me. So I left that firm. And the small firm, like I've always worked in smallish firms, like 2, 3, 4 people, maybe 10. Yeah, you get to do a lot more, like of all, I mean, in my experience, again, of the whole spectrum. But again, I don't know I haven't worked in a big firm in Canada. So
I think I would say that your experience in a smaller firm is probably a little more predictable. I find that, like people working at Dialogue, it really varies what their experience is depending on sort of where they land, what they end up working on, what sort of team they end up working with. So whereas with a smaller firm, it might be a little bit more consistent about how it will be for people.
Well, that's a really good point. One of the other questions that was directed at, for Maia was what the difference was about Vancouver's work culture, and why do you think working in Europe was more competitive and innovative compared to Vancouver, and do you have any personal strategies on how to kind of combat the less innovative environment that we're in Vancouver?
oh my God. Like it's again, my experience is small, it's 9 years in Vancouver, so I don't want to generalize everything. So it's not just in architecture, it's just the way culture is here is so little and not funded compared to Europe or to France, I guess. In schools and museums and just like all throughout my life, I was like, now I realize how much I had with culture and arts, but also, dance, theater, like, there's more money. Like in France, there's a ministry of culture, right? So here I find that there's a lot of places are volunteer based, right? Like, and it's privately funded, which is very different. So in terms of architecture, it's a different way of thinking, I guess. Here, if I sum it up, it's almost like architecture here I find is more of a business where you're supposed to make money, and in France it was more of a passion, like it's understood that you're just going to put up the hours and work a lot and not really make a lot of money, which is a problem. Like I wish there was a bit of a in-between kind of situation. But I do think that the fact that there's not a competition-based culture here diminishes the creative design that we can see. And I don't know, I worked in Paris and on like new plans for the city, new neighborhoods, and yeah, like each building is a competition, and it's open or closed, but and it's really encouraging young firms, and that's how young firms they get a name for them, and it's encouraging climate or like energy efficiency or wood building, and I don't see it here the same. Like I wish BC Housing put up like a competition with the city of Vancouver for like a big social housing, amazing passive house tower, instead of all these developers making millionaires homes that nobody needs or wants in the city. But that's, I don't know, my humble opinion. I don't understand the whole way of things working here, right? After 10 years, I'm not really into nitty-gritty of how it works, but that's how I observe, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I find it really interesting how everyone's stories and their backgrounds and what they've experienced really shape, how you see things unfolding here today. And maybe this is a question that we can direct at Ouri. Would you mind speaking a little bit more about your upbringing in Yellowknife and how your childhood influenced you to take up architecture?
Sure. I mean, I grew up in a small town. I'm sure many people on the call tonight have grown up in a small town, but also a unique place. The Northwest Territories is like a world unto its own. I had the privilege of traveling up there, and I actually just returned, and it's full of fluffy snow, and it's so beautiful. But one thing that I'm reminded when I travel there is how much Indigenous culture and language is kind of really embedded within the community. That you turn on the radio and you hear one of the 9 Indigenous languages on the radio. You hear it on TV. You see it in the. It's just like so much more interwoven into the fabric of the culture. But I grew up in a time when we didn't have access to Indigenous language classes in schools. And also my mom went to residential school, and she grew up being taught not to use her language around white people. And my father is non-Indigenous. And so as a child, she didn't use her language in the home when he was there. So, on a daily basis, my mom would use her language for like kids, for, I don't know, just like the things that you say to kids, like small commands. And especially when my aunts were around, they would all, like all the things that flash in my mind around the Indigenous culture, all the things that like auntie scream at like a whole bunch of cousins who are running around, like be quiet and go play outside and cut it out. Like all those things are the things that are like on top of my tongue, because those are the ones I heard the most as a child. But just like the use of the language wasn't something that I had access to, but I see it changing. I see the languages now being taught in schools, and now there's opportunities to take language classes online. And so the revitalization of culture is really strong. And while I was taught many, particularly values on Indigenous culture, I feel like I'm a little bit envious of my youngest sisters who got all of that, plus what they got in school, which was so much more. So, things are changing, and but all that I did learn, I'm able to bring with me.
Thank you. Yeah, I love hearing those stories, but like just, the language and commands you remember as a kid. I have something similar, only my background is more of like an Eastern European heritage, but yeah, it's interesting where there's overlap and how those can be such lasting memories.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a few questions from people that are curious for all of you. What keeps you inspired? Especially if you've been in the field for however many years, what keeps you going? And do you have particular ways that you have found to be helpful to combat stress and fatigue that have worked for you? Do you have any takers? Someone wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I'll try that. I think traveling, if you can, now that it's like as far as creativity, I think that traveling and exposing yourself to different cultures, whether they are Indigenous or further going to, I don't know, Mexico, or, it's far. Here it's so far from everywhere else. So I know it's like kind of a luxury to travel to other places that are not Canada. But even Seattle, to be honest, has like interesting architecture that I think just like being exposed to arts and culture, and that's what feeds me. That's also, I go to Seattle, there's a lot kind of a more, I don't know, like I love Vancouver, don't get me wrong, but like the cultural scene I find is a little bit smaller than Seattle, for example. Like the SAM has amazing exhibitions and things. So I would, yeah, going to those places, even in Vancouver, like art galleries and smaller arts opening. There's a lot more that's going on post-COVID now. Even going to the ballet, I think that's what I do. And what was the question about? Oh, stress. Stress is, well, I think I would say, especially with COVID, like staying, if you're working online and not seeing a lot of people, I would avoid that. I would go to the office. I would meet your friends or like co-workers there, try to set up, I don't know how it's working now in the firms, but like a day that everybody comes in, and that's what I would do. Or like have lunch with people and get outside. Don't be stuck in front of your computer all the time. That would be an anti-stress.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. I can see you've got your mouse unmuted. Did you want to speak?
Well, I think one of the points I made in my presentation, as I could no longer see the screen, was that every project brings new challenges. And so to me, that keeps it interesting. Even if on paper it looks like a not particularly interesting project, there's going to be something about it that is new and therefore makes it interesting. So that's one thing for me. And also just, I feel like as architects, there is such a huge range of what we do that even if a lot of the tasks seem kind of tedious or mundane, there's such a variety to what we do that, like, as long as you're not always having to do nothing but door schedules and hardware schedules, then you know, there's enough variety to keep it interesting. Yeah. I'm not going to talk about the stress part. Haven't figured that one out. Get exercise.
I think for me, the thing that inspires me is having a chance to learn from other people and to build relationships, and particularly the opportunity to build the relationships within the Indigenous community here in the Lower Mainland. It's been really meaningful for me to learn about Coast Salish culture and finding ways to help advocate for having their culture seen in architecture, because it's not my own. Like, as an Indigenous person, I'm from so far away. My culture is very, very different than the culture here, and so but still being able to advocate for that kind of change and also honoring local Indigenous cultures. It inspires me when we get a chance to do that, and it inspires me when I get to learn from local knowledge keepers. It just makes me feel so full and happy. But also working with younger staff inspires me. They're just so smart and knowledgeable, and finding ways to help them find their voice and see them grow, and you know, learning how to become a leader and helping people find their growth and find their path. That's another inspiration. And for managing stress, I turn my emails off after work, and I don't check my emails after hours. I used to like constantly check my emails, and I realized that it wasn't doing good for my well-being, and so I just tune out. And I think I encourage everyone to do that. You know, an email can wait until the next morning, or it can wait until Monday. It's not the end of the world. It's not an emergency. So I just turn it off, and that's been an immense change to my stress levels.
Yeah, that's a super healthy boundary. So I think excellent that you've just iterated that now. You just mentioned about, encouraging and supporting people in their career development. And I'm wondering, do you have any advice for young architects who want to advocate for themselves in terms of pursuing principal or partnerships? Some people find it, I guess, quite difficult to articulate, or they find maybe their ambitions not supported. So I don't know if you can speak to that from your perspective.
Yeah, it was actually another former dialoger who gave me the advice to know what I want and say it out loud. And that was Stefan Leroy. And he said, if you ever want to be an associate or a partner, you have to tell them, because if you don't tell them, then you won't get there. People can't assume what you want. So if you want something, you have to say it out loud. And so one is figuring out what you want. And I know that's hard for some people. It comes easy for some of us, but for some people, it's hard to know exactly what path they want to take. And it's important to understand like what the path means. And I think like that's one reason why I think it's really important to hear, for example, Kate's story, because she gets to be involved in all of the interesting parts of architecture. And sometimes as a principal, I kind of get bored with, or not bored, but it's like, it's not the same when you're writing invoices and doing paperwork. It's a lot of other different kinds of paperwork. And I'm not involved as deeply in design and as sometimes I would like to be, but it's the path that I chose. And it's the path that I wanted. So, I understand that it comes with some, giving up some of that design skills. Instead, I get to encourage other people in finding their design kind of passions and skills and encouraging them to find their design voice. So, so it's really about saying what you want, knowing what you want, or like, taking some time to figure it out, trying a few things. And then you just have to advocate for yourself, and don't be shy to say what you want, to tell people, because you won't get it if you don't advocate. Nobody's going to give it to you, because they won't know that that's what you want. You really need to say it. And I've just been so lucky that I got such good advice from so many people.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. I think as an extension of that, I suspect that, we've got so many people who have joined us tonight. Imagine a number of you are kind of in the middle of your career potentially, and I had a few questions pop up here, so I think this might apply to a few people, but thinking about how do you know when it feels right to change your situation? There's pros and cons in staying at a firm for years, and having that loyalty and that time to really build your experience. And then there's also pros to, let's say, jumping around and trying different things every few years. So I'd be curious for all panelists to comment on what your thoughts are on that, and how in your own experiences you knew when you felt ready to try something different.
I do think that early in one's career, it's not a bad idea to do a little bit of moving around to see how different firms operate, different ways of doing things. Sort of maybe, well, it so happened for me, it was sort of 2 or 3 years here and then 2 or 3 years there for several firms over my first 10 or whatever years of my career before I landed here. And I think that's not a bad thing. And then, when you find somewhere that you're comfortable, you kind of have more confidence also that it is the right fit for you. So in a way, I feel like it's difficult for people that start out in a great position and then, obviously don't want to give that up. But don't burn your bridges. You can always go and get experience elsewhere and then return to wherever it is if you leave on good terms. So yeah, keep those doors open. But as Ouri said, also just really important to advocate for yourself within wherever it is you're working. You know, we're always telling our staff, you have to tell us if you're hoping to get this kind of experience, that kind of experience. We can't promise that we'll be able to deliver on it right away, but if you don't tell us, we don't know to try and make it happen. So yeah, you have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I think in early career, it's good to move around and experience different scales of firms. It's always very scary to change, right? You never know. You know what you're leaving, but you don't know what you're getting. And it happened to me a few times where I got into a new firm and it wasn't at all what I expected it to be. So, and it's kind of hard to know what a firm is going to be because nobody really tells you the truth about how it is, unless that's why I think like if you go to like WIA or like find people, that's my advice is like find people who work there and like who you can ask like the real questions, like what's the work culture and like, you know, the things that you can't ask at an interview. Well, you can ask that question, but like they're not going to tell you, it's awful, right?
You'll get a polished response, I'm sure. But
so try to, I would say, yeah, because yeah, sometimes it's all like, you know, rainbows and stuff at the interview, and then you get in and it's like, oh my God, okay, yeah, that's not exactly what you talked about. So do your research. It's hard for newcomers because I remember moving to Vancouver and I had no idea what firms were what, right? And I found that it was quite difficult to get a real answer because here when you chat with people, they usually say, oh yeah, everything's great, I'm so busy and everything's wonderful. And you met with that person 3 months after and they quit their job and they're like, yeah, this was awful. That place was awful. And that's my experience. I don't find that people sometimes tell the truth about what they're actually experiencing because they just, I don't know, it's not okay to say that you're not great, I guess. That's what I'm learning, a bit of a cultural differences, I guess. So yeah, I would say kind of do your research and pros and cons, but you won't know before you try it. So just try it. And then if you hate it, just try something else. That would be my advice.
I think there's also finding the balance between interesting work, interesting projects, and a good office culture. And so, you know, figuring out which is more important for you, because there aren't that many places that can offer both. So
yeah,
you know, which is more important for you, getting some amazing experience on amazing projects, or having, you know, being in a really comfortable, supportive culture.
Yes, and once you find that place, and I think like, and you'll know it probably, right? And then you can hopefully grow within that space, and like Ouri said, advocate for yourself in that space. Yeah, like I think you're right. Like there's not a lot of offices that offer both. So.
And when you find a place where you get the good balance of both, hang on to it.
Well, jumping onto like another part of this question, how would you recommend approaching quitting a current situation without burning bridges? Or have you learned in the past from, you know, something that's gone totally wrong? I don't know if anyone has any advice to offer in that direction.
I mean, I've seen lots of others leave organizations in a really positive way, particularly young people going out on their own and not necessarily doing the same kind of work that the firm that they're leaving does. And so just being open and honest, like be honest about what your intentions are and why you might be leaving, particularly if it's to start your own practice, because, you know, lots of times in firms, we say no to work. And so I've seen, you know, people have opportunities come their way because they get recommended by their past employers, saying, well, you know, this project probably is too small for us at the moment. We couldn't take it on, but I know this person who could be great for you. So, you know, just be honest and also provide notice and be gracious. And I think there's, you know, if you're leaving because you're upset, then just be diplomatic about what you say and mostly just be gracious.
Yeah, and I think people do recognize that, especially relatively early in your career, it's good to go off and get experience elsewhere. So, and that you'll grow in the process. So, you know, even the place that you leave, you may be that much better staff person, better an architect if you were to come back later on. So I think people recognize the benefits of that. Timing, of course, is one thing that can be a little bit tricky. Finding the right time that you're not kind of leaving the firm totally in the lurch helps to be leaving on good terms. But
Well, I appreciate hearing all of you speak on that, and I'm sure many others do as well on the call. I don't have a natural segue for this last question, so I'm just going to jump right into it. It does veer paths a little bit, but someone had said, I love the way Ouri put her position as being a guest in the land where we are, and that approach is pretty much, you know, the fundamentals of good sustainable design. And so this question is for all the speakers. What is your experience in sustainability and in making buildings healthy for the environment and the inhabitants in BC? So I'm not sure who wants to take this first, but this was one of the last remaining questions, I think. So we can spend some time on it.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. Okay,
good.
go ahead, Kate.
I don't have a lot to say on it other than I think from my experience, the important thing is you know, trying to push the clients sort of a little further than they otherwise would. And it totally varies with the client, how far one is able to push one's projects in terms of sustainability. Some are very much more motivated than others. So the more we can do to kind of at least get them further than they otherwise might go, I think we've kind of done what we can with it.
Yeah, I advocate for lower energy buildings, and I think education obviously is a key, because I don't think a lot of people know about the impacts of the built environment on our climate. You know, a lot of people here have free heating, and they consume energy in a way that it's they think it's abundant, I guess. So that the education of people, of young generations, of your clients, because perhaps they don't know. You can use different materials that are, you know, there's the energy part, there's the carbon, embodied carbon in materials that is also obviously a problem. And then also the fact that we built for, you know, very short timelines, right? Sometimes people change houses or make new builds after 5 years or something. That's so wasteful. So I think you can advocate for all that, but there's there's been a shift. I've noticed a shift for the 10 years I've been here. When I moved here, I thought Vancouver was the greenest city in the world. And I was very surprised in terms of the built environment, how it's very not the like energy efficient. So, but now like it's changing slowly, and we hear it more in the conversation. So, but yeah, clients and convincing them would be tricky sometimes, in my experience, for sure.
Because I work with a lot of Indigenous communities and Indigenous clients, their desire to take on sustainability is often greater than their budgets allow for. And so helping them kind of make smart decisions throughout the process so that they can prioritize sustainability and be able to do it in ways that will be successful, or set them up for doing it in the future, like making a building solar ready if they can't afford the solar panels, or helping them to apply for grants to become solar ready, or to get to build more sustainable buildings. So we spend a lot of time working on kind of helping them through the process and helping them balance their desires, which are luckily, you know, often greater than what they can achieve. And so finding that good balance, and also the balance of good design in the rest of the building, so that we can achieve all the goals and figure out where the priorities are. And then trying to find like really cost-effective solutions for achieving sustainability, like making sure there's good daylighting and or situating the building in a way that we can take advantage of solar gain when we want it, or not having too much solar gain when we don't want it. And, you know, all of these kinds of ideas, the simple ideas, just we're trying to institute them right from the beginning of the design. But we have sustainability built into most of our projects in different ways.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, there's so much more about sustainability than even just the energy. And there's things like active design, like we're always trying to locate staircases in a way that people are more inclined to use them rather than the elevators, and the social sustainability side of it. And as Ouri mentioned, daylighting, which obviously it is also helpful for the users in terms of productivity and or learning opportunities. If it's an educational building, the more the better the daylighting is. So there's so many considerations around sustainability, and yeah, some of them don't necessarily have to cost a lot.
Yeah, even just like choosing to use wood over steel studs, for example, in a community building can help a community, especially a small community, achieve social sustainability or economic sustainability, because community members have a chance to gain work experience, or to have a job, or to get to become a ticketed, you know, journeyman or something. So or their community, local community businesses can participate in the design. So it, you know, we look at it from all the different angles, like Kate was saying.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experiences with us tonight. It was wonderful. And just one last little bit, because I know we only have a few minutes left on the sustainability point. Do you have any resources or places that you go for education and inspiration on the subject of sustainability that you would like to recommend for anyone who's interested in learning more? This was a little question that popped up, so I figured, I don't know if you have any inspiration on that, books or websites or films or anything.
Well, about architecture and sustainability, there's obviously lots of books, but no, not one of them comes to mind. But there's the Passive House, like there's so many organizations. There's the International Passive House, Canadian Passive House. They have a lot of like videos and things to, you can also take classes that you have to pay for, but there's a lot of just free resources online about it. Yeah, I think that you also, the library obviously would have some good points on good books. And here there's mass timber construction has, I think there's a lot of, like now with the internet, like so many free resources that you can watch online. And to like, I've recently come to BC Hydro has amazing videos on, you know, energy and buildings. And so it's they're advocating for lower energy buildings because they know that they don't have enough power to host like the millions of people who are going to move to BC, and so they want us to consume less. So even then they know, and we're lucky because in BC all the electric energy is clean. So that's amazing, right? So yeah, those are my resources.
I think actually some of the rating systems, even if you don't necessarily use them directly, like LEED and WELL and so on, there's a lot you can learn about sustainability and different aspects, different ways of looking at it through those systems. So I think that's one way to learn more also and get more ideas around it.
Does that look like that's all the questions, Brianna?
That was almost all of them. There were a few that were straggling, but I can also share them with the panelists afterwards or something if we wanted to have any last comments, but that covered the majority of the questions.
Okay, well, we're just about at 7 o'clock. So I have to say thank you everyone for spending the last 2 hours with us. I think this is one of the longer WIA events. And thank you, of course, to Kate, Maia, Ouri, and Robyn. Robyn, who had to leave early. It's really interesting to hear about your different paths and how you all came to the decisions in your life. For some younger people here, you know, it's not easy to see the path in front. And I think when we're young, and I talk for myself too, we kind of start by following along the well-worn path that we think we're supposed to lead. And then as we grow in courage, we start forging our own paths, but ultimately doing what's best for ourselves is critical and eventually leads to who we are authentically. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. And that is it for tonight. And we're at 6:58, so we're 2 minutes early. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.